Hey there, everybody. We're back with another video talking about collecting. Today, I have with me Eric, who is one of, I don't know, how do you want to describe it? One of the bigger collectors of Lord of the Rings TCG and just hit a really big goal where he has every single sealed product in English. And we thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about collecting Lord of the Rings, what brought him into the game, some of the stuff. We'll do a show and tell at the end. So I think this will be a really good video, just kind of talking about collecting all the cool and weird stuff out there. I mean, I already see, Eric, you got some really cool stuff in your background. I see a sealed, what is that, a shield uncut sheet, as well as some swords and
Yeah,
staves.
yeah, it's a uncut sheet of Fellowship of the Ring rares, which I think is just super cool because
Absolutely.
out of any uncut sheet, these ones only have one copy of each rare on it, so it just makes, in terms of a display piece, really cool with I think it's 11 by 11 cards or whatever. So,
And then is that Aragorn's sword or just a sword? Just for
it
self
is.
defense.
It's Glomdring. It's Gandalf's sword, and then
Got it.
Gandalf's staff there too. So I've never cosplayed or anything, but I just thought this props are really cool.
I'm going to shift the camera up. I just put up this Two Towers poster from the original movies up here. So it's not quite as cool as Gandalf's staff, but I just put this up myself. So, well, let's kind of get into it. So Lord of the Rings trading card game came out 2001, went out of print around 2007. What brought you into it? How'd you get into the game and kind of were you collecting all along from 2001 on, or did you sort of have a break, or what's kind of your story here?
Yeah. So actually, I'm kind of unique in that I was never actually involved in the original game while it was in print. So I wasn't involved in the tournament scene or buying cards at the time that was going on. But basically, I've always been a Decipher CCG player, and actually, at the age I was back then, I was playing Young Jedi. When that came out, and
Love
eventually,
Young Jedi. Love it.
yeah,
I know.
still a fun, fast game, honestly. But it kind of compared to the other Decipher properties, obviously doesn't have the depth of like a Star Wars CCG or a Lord of the Rings TCG. But I collect all three of the big three Decipher games of Star Wars, Star Trek, and Lord of the Rings. And so Star Wars actually was my first venture into all of this. But how I originally got into Lord of the Rings actually was my brother-in-law knew I liked CCGs, and he actually had some friends who were playing Lord of the Rings, and so he actually introduced me to the game. And my first intro into the game actually was playing Fellowship Draft Pack and playing that as a draft format, and that was really fun. And to this day, some of the best Lord of the Rings I've played. But we played that as a multiplayer format, which is one of the unique things you can do with LOTR that I don't think too many people are onto. But it's super fun, relaxing format where you can just sit down and play it as a group game. That's how I actually got introduced into playing.
I've never played more than one-on-one, so I guess I have to figure out how, because you can play up to, what is it, four, or is it?
Yeah, we would play 3 or 4, and either one of those worked really well.
Okay, interesting.
At least in that draft format. I've never done it with constructed decks. I think the constructed certainly lends towards the head-to-head play, but draft, obviously your card quality is much worse, and so it works works fine to do.
I will contend till the end of my days that draft is actually the ideal format for all CCGs. Unfortunately, some games are not really draftable. Star Wars CCG, for example, because you have two sides. But I think drafting is just the best way to play a game. And I wish Fellowship draft boxes were more affordable. For some reason, they're one of these products that's like very rare. And
yeah,
I'm not really sure why, but they.
Well, yeah, I hear you there. I mean, I remember buying those. They were sub $20 for sure. I know that, and now they're who knows, 150, 200 range probably, but they don't come on the market very often. And I'm still sitting on a couple that I use sparingly, but it's a fun format. But yeah, Two Towers draft is still somewhat accessible. I was going to say, if you're into draft format for Lord of the Rings, that's about the only thing you could possibly play is Two Towers draft. Those are still, you can get for $25 for a Towers draft box, and maybe $100 for a Towers booster. And so if you want to play, that's definitely a doable format. Not super cheap like it once was, but it's certainly doable compared to some CCGs.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started kind of playing as Decipher was closing down. So I mean, I think Decipher made just really great products, and I collect the big three as well: Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and then Star Trek a little bit minimally. But I was always more in the Star Wars realm, and then I've kind of gotten into Lord of the Rings. I mean, I think that Lord of the Rings is such an underrated game. I think that the cards look great. The movie stills, the kind of lore and the flavor, I think that they're still the best looking cards. Although sometimes I doubt the quality. They get scratches really easy in the back. That's just one of my own observations. But
I think the card stock's a little thinner on Lord of the Rings cards, but
yeah. Okay, so you kind of got into it from your brother-in-law, and then you just kind of didn't look back and just kind of been collecting for 10 years?
Yeah, more than that now, I'd say, because that was probably 15 years now. I've been playing / collecting, and and there's ups and downs where you put it down for a while, you pick it back up again, sort of thing. But basically, my journey, I guess, if you will, was all I was in for it originally was playing, and so this was in the late 2000s. And I think I was telling you this while we were chatting, is you could pick up sealed product for just next to nothing. And people who weren't buying back then would be shocked by some of these prices, but you could get like Mines of Moria booster box or Shadows booster box, $6, literally sealed booster box. And I was buying Return of the King anthologies just because those had reflection packs in them. I think it has 5 in there or whatever. But you could get a sealed Return of the King anthology, $9. And so I was just buying those in bulk just for like the reflections packs. And, just stuff like that going on is just crazy, because I don't think anyone foresaw, or very few people foresaw, that 15 years into the future these would be a rare niche collectible that people would be displaying and keeping sealed or anything like that. That was not a thing in the CCG world back then. I don't think from anyone who was around back then could say that they're like, yeah, I'm gonna box these up and save them. And so I was basically just originally buying stuff just to play the game, and so did quite a bit of that. My only regret was back then I wasn't into foils at all, didn't care. And so I was just trying to get regular copies of the cards. And obviously anyone who's involved in the game now knows that the foil multipliers in this game are just insane, where a foil card just draws just a massive premium. And quite honestly, there's some of the most beautiful foils in any game too, just because of the selective foiling techniques that is used by Decipher on these cards. So that's my one collecting regret, is that I certainly bought plenty of product for me to have the collection I need to play, up through movie block, and had, everything I needed for that, but never got into the foils. And to tell you, this is kind of a crazy pricing story too. Foil sets back then weren't a thing either. Like, no one cared, so I bought a couple Mount Doom foil sets, for example. So set 10, $35, complete foil set. And that was what was going around back then. And it was the same price as a regular set. So you could buy the regular set for $35, you could buy the foil set for $35. And it's like, the prices are just astounding, obviously, now compared to what they were. But that's kind of how I was able to get into it, is you could amass a really good collection for fairly little cost back then. And that's what I did in terms of a play collection.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess, why do you think this game has kind of taken off? Because I think it's funny you say you were actually a good example of one of the people who got the cheap stuff, right? Because I think a lot of people, there's a lot of this nostalgia, like, oh, I could have got to Hills in 2009, Hills Wholesale Games, I would have bought this. Like, so you're living the dream here.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what do you think has sort of led to this creep in prices? I joined in 2020, maybe 2020 probably, and stuff was still pretty cheap there. I remember coming to the Lord of the Rings community from the Star Wars community, which has had a pretty robust, buying and selling market. eBay sold. There's, category. There's all these resources out there, places where you can find pricing, and then just having no idea how to even price a card, right? It's like, oh, what's the price? There's no eBay sold history. Is it $1? Is it $10? But everything was still relatively cheap. What do you think has kind of led to this increase in the last 3 years, let's say, or 2-3 years?
Yeah. I mean, so from the macro level, I'd say it's, certainly the new Amazon Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, just bringing interest to the Tolkien properties that have been, somewhat dormant since, certainly since The Hobbit. And obviously the property that this is based on, the original trilogy, was definitely much more beloved. But I think just the interest in the property, that brings a lot of people back into it. And then I would say the other thing that, I don't know if I'd say this is Magic specifically, but the whole concept, and this is what brought me back into it, is the idea of the foil collecting. Like I said, I never got into the foil collecting the first time around when I was doing this, but that's something that's fairly big in the MTG community, especially, one of the main formats I play there is Commander, which is basically you make 100 card singleton deck, whatever. Don't need to go into all of that, but the point is there's big incentive to keep this deck with you long term, upgrade your cards, have fancy versions and foil versions of the cards. And so it's kind of this idea of having this fancy upgraded deck. And, kind of that's what brought me back into it is I've had my decks forever of, here's my top level decks for King, for a movie block, for fellowship block. I've had those, for, 10, 15 years. But the idea that I came back with in particular was, hey, I'm going to collect these foils for the decks. Now, I don't think that's that common because most people are just say, hey, I'm trying to put together a single set, or I'm going to try to get my favorite character foiled in every different version that character comes in, or different things like that. But to me, because I was a player at heart, and because of my experience in other games having the fancy foiled out decks, that was what I decided to do and say, hey, I'm going to collect foils for my decks and make these decks, look cool, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great use of the foils. I think as well, Lord of the Rings benefited from sort of this nostalgia cycle. I've talked about this before, but they usually run about 15 years, right? It's enough time for people to have grown up, gotten a job, and then to have disposable income, right?
Yeah.
So 15 years ago, I look at myself and I don't know, I remember kind of buying a couple fellowship boxes, but I didn't really have the disposable income. And then 15 to 20 years later, it's like, okay, I'm settled down now and I have a little extra cash. And so I think it benefited from that 15 to 20 year nostalgia cycle, which began about 3 years ago. And then also, I always have 3 fundamental rules of whether I think a game is worthwhile. But, is there utility, right? Like, is there a game that can be played that's fun, which this is a fun game to play? That's one thing I tell people, you should play this game. How do the cards look, right? Physically, right? Do they look nice? This game looks fantastic. And then kind of third is the IP it's based upon real? Like, why did Beanie Babies fail? Well, no one cares about Beanie Baby. There's no books. There's no universe. No one cares about the Beanie Baby lore. I'm sure it's out there, but
yeah, I think those are good tests. I completely agree with that, and I definitely agree. This checks all the boxes, and that's what I think Decipher was good at, that I still haven't seen anyone to this day do as well as Decipher did, is capture a property in a flavorful way in a game and in a way that the cards look incredibly appealing. That's what's just to me as a, connoisseur of the hobby is like, I look at Decipher and I say, look at what these guys were doing in the year, 2000. And they were so far ahead in terms of graphic design and art and just the visual presentation on these cards that it's pretty incredible that you can pick them up 15 years in the future and say, hey, these still look pretty dang good in this day and age. And so I think that's a testament to the work that those guys were doing. And, definitely sad the way that all ended. But, I think we're all incredibly fortunate to be able to have played those games at the time we played them and still have them around for people who do,
Yeah, that's one thing I'll say is I'm fortunate. It's sort of like it's like a breakup, right? I'm happy it happened. I'm happy we have those memories, but also the folks that are like, what if we start a change.org petition to get the game reprinted by Decipher? I'm like, okay, let's not go there. We don't need to get back together. That sort of stuff. The need to go back to get this printed again. I think that. I'm just happy that we've got the cards we do. I think the PC is doing really interesting work with virtual cards, with GEMP, this platform. And I think there's a lot of glide paths and sort of ramps for folks to get involved in the game. So this kind of brings me to the question, do you have any tips or suggestions of new folks that are coming in? I think there's going to be a whole sort of, bevy of them coming in with interest in sort of the new Tolkien properties or just Magic stuff that are going to find the game. I mean, there's 40 million Magic players. I'm one. Sounds like you're one. If you only 0.01% accidentally find this game, that's already maybe doubling the size of the community. So, I'd like just your kind of thoughts on, do you have any tips or suggestions for, people that find this game, they're just Googling stuff and like, oh, this looks great. What are some ideas of, either getting into collecting or getting into playing this game that don't have to cost thousands of dollars?
Yeah, I would say, and this advice would be true whether you're collecting or whether you're playing, and this comes from obviously someone who has a lot of experience doing both, is that complete sets 100% are going to be your way to go.
Yeah.
Complete sets of these cards are still incredibly affordable, and we're talking like $100 range, which hopefully if you've played other CCGs, you say, hey, you know what, that actually is a pretty affordable base price. You talk about something like, use Fellowship of the Ring as an example, 365 card set, 121 rares. And so you just do, say, a booster box. Booster box is going to cost you, for 36 packs, it's in that realm of 175, maybe up to 200 now by this point. I haven't looked recently, but the point being is, even if you just look at, say, how many rares can I get? That's how I used to always look at it when I was actually just ripping packs to get cards. And it's like, okay, I can get 36 rares for maybe $200. And it's like, you look at buying a complete set, you can get a Fellowship of the Ring complete set, I think 100, 125, maybe 150, that range there. Certainly cheaper than a box for the complete set with a complete one of every of the 121 rares. And, you compare that and it's like, no way in heck, if I'm trying to either collect complete sets or play the game, no way am I telling anyone to buy sealed product. The only way you buy sealed product is either you like it looking nice on the shelf sealed, or you like to rip it for the nostalgia and say, hey, I want to have fun opening packs because that's what I had fun doing originally. Or, you're chasing foils for fun just to say, hey, this is a fun foil to get. But again, even if you're going for foils, never, ever would you want to buy packs to do that. So the point is if you're buying packs, you're doing it for fun and because you love it, and that you're paying a huge hefty premium to do that. Because if you're wanting to collect the cards set wise or deck wise, buy yourself complete sets. That's the hugest favor you can do. You can even find people who have opened up tremendous amounts of this, or who have extra in their collection that they don't want. And if you don't mind some, LP, MP cards, you can come into some, really nice collections in terms of playability. Obviously, if you're a collector and you like to have mint cards, you have to ask around and make sure that's what you're getting. But it's very accessible still for open product of sets 1 through 10, or 1 through 12, let's say, of course.
Yeah.
But, I always use 1 through 10 as the artificial cutoff, because that's kind of like Lord of the Rings' first edition, movie block, as they call it. But the point is anything from those sets that's not foil is still tremendously available. Could that change with a bunch of MTG players coming in to take a look? It's possible. I think you'll see that definitely in the collecting market, because MTG has a huge finance arm to it, of people that do it for finance and profit and whatnot. And so I think that those people, if you introduce people like that into this community, they're going after foils, they're going after sealed product, because that's what's scarce in our community. I don't see them going after the standard play sets of play cards, because those are very plentiful. So I think you see a bump in pricing on that stuff, but I think where you'd see the huge influx, if it does happen, is in the sealed product side and in the foiled side.
I 100% agree with that. And just a note on sort of playing with sets, one thing that's really great about the way this game is made is, since all of the cultures are numerically located together, having a full set can be a really great way of building a deck, because you're going to see, like, okay, all of Gondor culture is together. These are the 30 cards that probably have synergy together, right? You can kind of look and see and read the cards, and it makes deck building a little bit easier than, for example, in Magic, where it's like, okay, all the blue cards are not like numerically next to each other, right? It's not quite as easy to like build a deck. So I think from a deck building perspective, it's nice if you just have a full set, you can sit there and look, like, here are my options, and they're kind of grouped in a way which makes it easier to also view. And I do also agree with the sort of collecting. I think there's a good chance that the sort of higher end stuff, the rarer stuff, I actually don't think this is going to apply to sets 15 to 18, because they're just too weird. And we might get to that later. I think that there's something to be said about, it's niche, but is it too niche? But I think that foil sets from 1 to 10, sealed product, that stuff is all going to continue to see a boost. I think for something to see a boost in price, there has to be a baseline of availability, right? If it's just not available ever, then people don't even know how to price it, because there's not price history. Like, I saw somebody today in the forums trying to sell, Mandarin cards, right? Very interesting, right? They're printed for one set, interesting niche thing, but there's no price history. And so it's like, all right, is this worth $30 or $40? And you just don't
Yeah.
really know. And I think that's one of the things with the super rare stuff, sets 15 to 18. It's like there's no price history. So it's really what will one or two collectors pay? And I think for new folks coming in, they're just like, I don't understand why this Gilgalad from set 18 is $260. I'm just going to pass right on that.
Yeah.
So I think for that increase to happen, there has to be a baseline.
Completely agree with you there. And that's, and you've identified in this particular game what that is. And that is the set 15 plus cards. There's, especially you get into 17, 18, the availability is so small that there literally is no public market for it. I mean, and I've ended up buying quite a bit of singles in this, just again, because this is kind of the next step for me is, hey, I want to try out some decks in the standard / expanded realm is the formats they classify that as. But basically there's nowhere where you can go on even to buy the cards if you wanted to and had an unlimited budget. You can't buy them. You have to basically network around to even find the cards. And then they're in the hands of a very few number of people, some of which who, control the prices pretty stiffly. And, that's, that, like you said, that's a niche collector market that you have to network with other niche collectors in. There's not even a, public marketplace for it, like even like Star Wars there is, so it's something that is very unique to just 15 through 18. So I would say anyone who's new to collecting, your instincts are correct to stay away from that until that's where you're at, and that's the only thing left for you, and that you really do still have a passion to get into that realm. Because the pricing is crazy, and you're basically networking with people all over the world through that Facebook group you mentioned. That's the only way you can find these cards. They're literally not on eBay, where there's one or two sellers on eBay who will post singles with, I'd say, 100% plus markup to show that it's out there as an available sale. But then, in terms of any of the actual sales that are occurring, they're not even occurring on eBay. So there's nothing to document.
Right. And so, I mean, I find that because I'm a big transparency guy, right? I'm trained as an economist, so I like markets. That's sort of what my background is. And so for me, transparency is really important. The availability of data is really important. And that's why one of my biggest collecting pet peeves is the PM me for details. Like, I'm just like, well, what's going on here? What are you guys talking about? Like, what is the price? What is the, I know the demand is high, supply is low, but, also these are incredibly elastic goods. No one needs this. This isn't food or water, right? So, it's hard to figure out this market, and it's small and can be manipulated easily. But let's get to a more fun kind of question here. What's your favorite culture to play, or favorite card?
Yeah. So favorite culture, and my core of playing is typically in movie block. That's what I find to be the most complete and most satisfying.
So that's 1 through 10, right?
Most diverse decks. So it's 1 through 10. So it includes, basically the numbering for anyone who doesn't know this obviously is a little weird because Reflections is set 9. So basically there's the 3 sets from each of the 3 movies, which is 1 through 8 and 10. And then there's also Reflections in there at 9. So it's 1 through 10. That's the movie block. That's my favorite format by far to play. My favorite culture in there is let's say for Shadow side, my favorite culture is Dunland. I don't know. I just like it's definitely different than any of the other cultures where you have these weak minions that can't be exerted because they only have 1 vitality, but then all of a sudden, they control a couple sites, and then they just start recurring Dunland Elders out of the discard pile, which are 12 power damage plus 1 fierce, 2 Twilight. So I mean, it's pretty crazy. That's my favorite Shadow side to play. For free peoples, I guess my favorite thing is I always prefer like a solid, I guess what Lord of the Rings players probably call a tank deck, which is you take your mains and you load them up with the possessions and the artifacts and make them powerful, maybe what you'd consider like mains and toys in Star Wars CCG, that kind of style of a deck. So I don't really have a favorite free people culture, but that, definitely that style of play where you're either, Gondor men or, something like that, where you're taking Aragorn, putting on Anduril, you're putting, big minions with, big companions with all their stuff on them. That to me is the funnest way to play, as opposed to, there are some gimmick type decks, but I always like just the solid mains are more fun for me than the gimmicky decks.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I was trying to remember what that deck's called in Magic. Like, is it like a Megatron deck or something, or you just like have one thing you're buffing up with?
Voltron, they'll call that in like Commander, where you basically just take your commander, you load up everything just on that one card and try to attack with just that.
I was like Megatron, no, sorry, Voltron. So I love Dunlin. I mean, I'll be a little more crass here. I think it's just fun to see these like dirty guys, these like the scraggly hair, like overwhelming the Fellowship. It's sort of like I think they're very thematic and well designed. I think a close second would be sort of Umber, or I'm sorry, like Harad, like the Southern Men.
Oh, Southron, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot they kind of created that. There's like, are they Harad or are they?
Yeah. Well, there's that's what's really interesting in the movie block is you can have definite solid decks they have Easterling, which is going to load up some big minions and go add 2 burdens. Basically, once they get their 2 burdens, they've got their Easterling captains and Easterling armies that they're going to go after you with. That's its whole own deck, and prevent wounds and everything too. But either way, you got your Easterlings. Then you've got your Southrons, which is typically going to be archery based with Desert Lord and the other minions that just add to the archery total. And so, they're both yellow men, but you got 2 completely distinctive deck types. And then you also got Corsairs, which is your 3rd yellow men deck type, which that's a really fun one to play too with not play against necessarily, but you got Castamere of Umbar and Corsair Marauders, and you're just discarding people's possessions and then having these massive, fierce, enduring minions going against. So, but the point I'm trying to make is in movie block there, yellow men, you've got 3 different top level decks that you can play yellow men out of that are completely 3 different decks from each other and barely have any overlap in cards between those sides.
So I mean, I didn't really even think about the sort of subcultures within the cultures. Yeah. Side note, I think we're going to do a video later on sort of movie deck formats with Eric. So that's going to be a forthcoming thing. We'll get it filmed eventually, but we will talk a little bit more strategy. And I'll just give a plug. I forgot to say at the beginning, but if you guys like the content, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, just so we can continue growing the game. So I think we kind of hit on this a little bit, but just sort of a broader structural thing. I think we see both positive and negative things happening in the game. You've got a more robust players committee than ever, right, with sort of new cards. And there's a platform like GEMP. There's tons of resources. There's this really robust Wikipedia where you can find information. But then also contrasting that with, sealed products dried up. There's just generally less of it available. Prices are creeping up. It seems like perhaps the COVID collecting frenzy is ending more as a sort of a macro level trend. So I'm curious, where do you see things going? And there's also this looming question of, the Magic, Lord of the Rings property coming out, and perhaps that's going to bring, even if it just brings like 200 people, and that's like, probably 20% increase or something in the community, right? It's a pretty niche.
Yeah, it's a small tight knit community for sure.
Right.
And, but yeah, all the things you mentioned, those I'd say are the key factors that we're seeing out right now, in either whether you say it's the market for collecting or whether it's what's going to happen with people playing this game. I think GEMP is fantastic. I'm not a GEMP player myself, but I think that resource is what you need to keep a game like this going, because especially with Lord of the Rings, there's people all over the world that are playing this. I think specifically just because, the European crowd and the Tolkien fans that are over there, but either way, the point is the GEMP is fantastic. I myself love what the players committee is doing. As far as what they did is they went through and took the X list, which is like what LOTR calls their banned list. And they said, hey, let's make a new version of all of these cards that is fair, that people actually could use in the respective formats, and kind of starting with Fellowship block just as a small sample. And so they've done that, and they've gone through and remade versions of the cards that are overly powered. And then also they've done some buffs to the cards that are underpowered. And I actually am probably unique in this, but they've got a great tool called VKit, which, you know, the Star Wars players use, and the Lord of the Rings Players Committee has made now all of their virtual cards, all of the errata, all of Decipher's cards are all available on this VKit. So anyone who's interested to play on paper, I can't highly recommend that enough. You just go in, print the cards, and you have a high res proxy of anything that you need, slash a virtual version of all of the errata. And you know, I myself also am a Star Wars player, so I have a high tolerance for the concept of someone making me print out a color slip and cutting it out and inserting it on top of a card. You know, I think some of the newer players might look at that and say, "Hey, that's stupid. Why are you doing that?" But it's like, "Hey, that's what Star Wars has been doing for 20 years." So I've got no issues with that. So that's actually one of the things I have recently done is I printed off the Fellowship, the errata that the Players Committee has done, and I'm going to start playing Fellowship block now all over again on paper with these fresh cards. And that's pretty exciting to me because that's been the same for 20 years. And now it's going to be, I believe, substantially fixed with the upgrades and improvements they made that, you know, people are worldwide enjoying on GEMP. But my enjoyment of the game is still, I love it on tabletop, especially, you know, Lord of the Rings, like you're talking about the cards and the fact that you've got your blood tokens for your wounds and your black tokens for your burdens. And, you know, it just, I think, has a different experience playing it in person. So that's what I love. But again, I realize I'm in the minority with probably doing that on the paper. So I think that the GEMP is absolutely fantastic. And, you know, for new players, like I said, I think there's definitely opportunity to play on paper, though, if that is what you're into. And, as I said earlier, just don't think of this as you might have thought when you first played CCGs and said, "Hey, when I first played CCGs, I ordered a case of cards from Hills Wholesale Gaming and we ripped them open and made decks with it." You know, it's got to now be, "Hey, I picked up someone else's collection, or I picked up some sets or some singles, and now I'm going to use that." But I think there's definitely an opportunity to still play on paper if you're interested in that. And I think that Magic, obviously has kind of the dual game there too, with tons of people play on Arena, but they have a very active paper game also. And so I think you're going to get people from each of those realms that might be interested, quite frankly, because when you compare, Magic obviously uses fantasy illustrators that are, top of the industry and, look fantastic. But to me, if you're relating this property to the actual movie, and the movies are Lord of the Rings to you, this Decipher game is still going to do that better than anyone, because it's still the only one out there that uses the stills from the movie and the shots of the actors. And, if Viggo Mortensen is Aragorn to you, an illustration from a fantasy artist of a random man is not going to be Aragorn to you. So I think that's what the appeal, that's like the third on your list of enduring qualities of a CCG. This one, if you say which is a stronger property, Tolkien's books or New Line Cinema's movies, I think the movies are, although obviously based on Tolkien's work himself, I think the movies are a stronger property among the market of people that would play this type of game.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, it's a hot take, but I think you're right there. I mean, I grew up, I read the books, I love the books, but to me, the movies are what really hit that spot. I mean, I also saw them at a very formative time in my life, and it might be different for other people, but I think the movies are almost more iconic than the books. I mean, the one thing I say about this game is it's a very tactile experience. You kind of describe the tokens, and I think that is what makes it feel special, actually having this sort of extra pieces. And I think one of the big tasks is to just demystify V cards, virtual cards. I think people get a little spooked by arts and crafts, I myself included, which is why I tried to do some videos on, hey, this isn't so bad. You can print these off for free, or if you want, you can go down to Kinko's and get them done, high res if you don't have a printer or whatever. But this is not hard to do. It's just an hour, and you need a big table. And I think they can improve gameplay. I get they don't look perfect, but it is a cheap on ramp as well playing with proxies, no one is stopping you. No one's going to bust it. I sometimes see this in the Star Wars groups, like, is this tournament legal? I'm like, when are you going to a tournament, man? Like, they still have tournaments, but nobody's busting down your door to like see what cards you're using at your kitchen table or when you play on a Saturday with buddies, right? Like, I just think this idea that like, oh, it's not tournament legal. I'm like, but are you going to like San Diego to play at nationals or whatever? No, you're not.
Yeah.
If you are, then like you can have a different consideration, but don't let this fear of proxies or of breaking the rules, these aren't the official cards, like just have fun with it, have positive experiences. That is the key to all of these games. So I always tell people, just have positive experiences, whether it's positive experience trading, positive experience buying, positive experience playing. These are all the necessary components to kind of create that special feeling of like, hey, I'm back in this again. And with Magic, the reason I stopped playing Magic is I didn't have very positive experience with it anymore. I'd like, just play these horrendous commander decks. And I mean, I still think the best Magic format is what I call the beer and pretzels format, right? You're just at the kitchen table, right, with some friends. You guys are casual. That is the best format, right?
Yeah, I play sealed Magic is still fun.
Yes.
I don't. It's Magic, especially. We don't need to get into that in this video, but it's really multiplied itself in the last 2 to 3 years in terms of the sheer volume of what is required to keep up with the game and the number of releases and the number of alternate variants. Yep. Just absolutely insane. Anyone who's in it knows what I'm talking about. So that I think has taken a lot of the joy out of collecting and playing, but it's still great to just sit down and play a game of Sealed and relax with friends and, have a beer, have a, drink and have a, chill evening with some buddies. And that's to me always, no matter what game you're talking about, that's the way to go.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, I think we'll maybe move on to our show and tell here. So I mentioned at the beginning of the show that you just completed a pretty big task, which is one sealed product of every single English language set. Do you kind of want to show off some of this? And I think it'll prompt a little bit of conversation here as well, because I think some of this stuff people just never seen, including myself. There's one thing you have, the Rise of Saruman deck box. I just didn't know that existed. I mean, I knew it existed, but I didn't know.
Yeah, so I'll show the stuff. All I have out right now is the booster boxes of the three final sets, but that's where I ended up being very fortunate with these. Is I bought these booster boxes like 8 years ago when they were expensive back then still, but they existed and could be found and purchased. Yeah. Nowadays they're so scarce that buying this stuff now is absolutely crazy. And someone who's had to buy a couple, higher end things recently for that. So what I did is I completed the boosters 8 years ago. But if you compare what I did to complete that compared to what I just had to do to complete even starter boxes, which would probably be considered to be slightly less valued than a booster box, it's crazy. The ability to try, you have to, there's small single digits of these in the world in terms of an open market. So, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, you got your Rise of Saruman, which is set 17 box from a guy in Poland. Is that right?
Yeah. So that was the latest one. Yeah. I got you. And if you're doing anything set 17, 18, whether it's singles, or sealed products, not even out there really, but singles, even I've put together some play sets of some of the keys, cards in set 17 and 18. You literally have to network worldwide to even put together like a play set of a card for a top deck, whether it's like Gil-galad that you mentioned, or a Relentless Warg or something like that. You literally have to inquire around and message people and try to even find it to put together a play set. So that's where, as you said, that type of gameplay is just really not doable at any sort of a scale. Of course, unless you're using proxies, then it would be. But just to generate the interest and get it going, I just don't see it. I don't see it happening. But like I said, PC is doing a great job focusing on those more basic formats. But let me pull these out and just kind of show people who may have not ever seen one of these in real life. So the first one I got is a Hunter's booster box. Most people are probably familiar with kind of that front of that, but even like the art on these, I always say, is fantastic. Decipher did a great job of like every side of this box has different character art, and this is where people, like I said, would have never even seen some of these things. There's a ranger on that side, and Aragorn and Legolas there, and Orc on that side. So I mean, it's pretty cool stuff to even still have in your hands. And I think the one thing too that people always ask about these is anyone who collects Lord of the Rings knows Decipher had their own branded shrink wrap, but these final sets do not have Decipher shrink wrap on it. They quit using that, I think, with all the probably save a few cents on each one at the end of the company when they were bleeding money from everything that was going on.
And they don't have the box number either, right? They don't have the number print number.
Well, let's see. I don't know. Yeah, no print number.
Okay, so that's one of the big mysteries of how many are actually out there, because the other sets do have a number on the bottom.
Yeah, and that I'm very familiar with from Decipher. I don't think I ever, I don't handle these boxes much for obvious.
Yeah, understandably so.
And I've got this like stacked on a piece of cardboard, so I'm not even directly handling it. But this is Rise of Saruman booster box, and then there's like an Orc army on there, or Uruk-hai army, excuse me. And then over here, you've got, I can't even tell on my camera what this is.
I don't know what that is either.
It's just more Uruk-hai army. Yeah, it's a full span of Uruk-hai army on all three sides of this.
Very cool.
On Rise of Saruman. But yeah, there's the.
So I think 17 is the rarest of the three. That's my own theory.
I'd agree with that. For some reason, there seems to be more of 18 than 17. And 15 certainly had the highest print, but they've all obviously been opened at this point. But 17 is definitely the hardest to find from what I've seen available.
I think that tends to be true with a lot of these block sets. It's like the middle child gets forgotten a little bit. Yeah. As a middle child, I can speak to this, right? I think it's just at 18 they're just like, we got to get this out the door, like put the printers going as quick as we can.
They didn't 18 has, as anyone who has looked at this for actual cards and playing, 18 has a tremendous amount of errata on it because it wasn't even tested and it was just pushed out the door. So there's things that in a typical set would have been caught that are as being overpowered or broken combos, and they just let it go and then errata later. So here's the last one. Here's the T&D box. Most people are familiar with that Gollum. I think have seen that before. But even like the sides of this are pretty cool. There's Shelob and Frodo in the front there. And then what's on this side? I think, that's Sam. Yeah, that's Sam. So this is all like the Shelob's Lair type theme. And then on this side, they've got like the Palantir.
Shelob's Lair was going to be a set. I think
that was going to be a set. I don't know the whole history on that, but they definitely, I think if you look at the first sets, it's very well defined what movie you're in and what part of the movie you're in. But these latter sets, I think, are a little bit blended together because in theory, this is the two towers. They never made it into Return of the King because they only got through their first two blocks because they just kept cutting sets off their release calendar with the embezzlement costing them all the money and all that. They were just bleeding. So really sad. It would have been cool to see had this, this is what I consider second edition LOTR. Had they actually been able to fully flesh out a second edition, what would have that looked like? And basically, I think these last two sets got, what would have been the entire, stuff from Return of the King just jammed into them.
Yeah, I think I would have loved a second edition of Lord of the Rings. And one of the things, this is my own scruple, but sometimes I want to play in this universe and do something besides destroy the ring, right? Like I would love to have a 9-set, like a objectives module, or like something like you have in Star Wars, where you like instead of destroying the ring, you're going to crown Boromir Steward of Gondor, right? And like you need to do certain things.
All win cons would have been really cool. That there definitely would have been, I think, opportunity for that like, hey, you get to this site, and if you've done this certain thing by then you win by this alternate way,
Right. Yeah. I think it just would have been sort of fun, and I think it would have been possible. So that's just something I think about sometimes. It's like, well, what if it wasn't always racing to destroy the ring? It's when I'm racing to burn down the Shire or something, right? Like that could have been a fun thing to do as well. But that's just a fun thing to speculate. So if folks have questions, we might do a follow-up video. This has been a lot of fun. I know we're kind of approaching 45 minutes to an hour here, which I lose people's attention to that long. But we might do a follow-up. So if you guys have questions, please leave them in the comments here and let us know. We can kind of put together possibly a part 2, and we'll maybe do some sort of movie deck play video as well down the road. But I'd love to hear other questions that people have about collecting. And, this is a really cool collection you have, Eric. Thank you very much for sharing it and sharing your thoughts and stuff. Do you have kind of some final thoughts here?
No, I mean, really appreciate you having me on, Matt. And, final thoughts. I think you said it best earlier on, which is just have fun with these games and, whatever that means to you. And that's what I think, about these old Decipher games compared to something with Magic the Gathering is it's not so much of a commodity. It has the nostalgia to it. It has the fun properties to it. It has the, I remember, doing this when I was younger aspect. So I think that's the biggest thing is just, have fun with these games and don't get caught up in, treating it as a commodity or as an investment. And I think that's what, ruins hobbies for people is when you end up doing something like that. So I've been able to ride the fine line of both, like I said, of being able to collect these things. And, I'm a very nostalgic person myself, but to me, it always does just come back to the playing the game and having the fun with the cards. That's where I've met and networked with some collectors that literally don't know how to play the game. And to me, that's always baffling because my love of the cards and love of the game is centered around the game.
Right.
Granted, the cards, the cards are obviously very beautiful. There's a quote from Warren Holland that just, always gets me where he said, the cards were beautiful works of art. And, you hear the guy say that and you just, feel that, feel that right here when it's like, man, this guy poured his life into this, literally, in terms of making these cards. And so like I said, I say you take them and you honor and respect the fact that, what people did to give you this enjoyment, and you just enjoy it with family, with friends, and remember that there's more to it than cards, and more to it than money, and just have fun and enjoy yourself. That's what it's about. So.
Yeah, I think this is a really good way to close it. I think that finding that community, right, whether that's your family or your friends, but also online, like both of us connected through the Facebook group. I don't like Facebook for many reasons, but I think there's a great way of kind of finding a little bit of community. There's also a pretty active Discord group, which is more player focused. So there are ways to connect with other people, to do some trading. I'm not going to lie. The first time I did a trade online, I was like, what am I doing? How do I go to the post office? I haven't been to the post office as an adult ever. You said you figure it out, and it's a lot of fun to sort of trade with other people, and build decks. And that's the fun part is I think the interactiveness of this. And, you said networking with other collectors, and that is right. It is essentially networking, right? It is finding ways to talk to a guy in Poland that has this very rare product and figuring out a way of transporting it successfully to the US or whatever the case is. So I think that's the big recommendation I have for folks. If you think all this stuff is cool, that's great. But both of us, we don't bite. Reach out and talk to us. We're happy to talk to people, and there's lots of ways of getting involved. So don't feel like just because it's out of print that it has to be dead. It is out of print. That is what it is. But there's 19 sets. Really, 12 of them you should think about. The other ones maybe not so much. But find some folks and just play some games, or start the collection. It's never too late. The only bad day to buy is tomorrow, right? That's me. I've always been collecting, so I don't regret anything I bought, mostly. So thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back in future episodes with some other stuff. But subscribe, all that good stuff. And thanks so much, Eric.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Matt.